Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan from the beautiful studios here at Tech Town in beautiful Midtown Detroit, Michigan. I am Jer Stays. Across the table from me is
Norris Howard.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, man. I'm real excited. The new Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out, so that's what I'm going to be doing towards the end of the month. Just had to get that out there. I'm very excited about video games right now.
So you're a Final Fantasy guy.
I play everything, but mostly, yeah, I play a lot of RPGs and a lot of fighting games. A lot of them, so I'm very excited about this game.
It should surprise no one that I am a SimCity fan or a Skylines fan.
I love City Skylines. What are you talking about? Come on, man. You think both of my latent love of civil engineering and my God complex doesn't come into play with SimCity or Civ or City Skylines or anything like that? Love those games.
Well, we're going to talk about a couple of cities and urban things. First off, we're going to talk about Detroit City Council districts. And then we're going to get into, and we'll start the conversation later on about you getting your library card.
Yes, very exciting. I've already utilized it a couple times, so I'm pretty happy with it.
It's a follow-up to a previous conversation. It's going to be more than about just library cards, but it's a good start. First off, Detroit City Council districts have been accepted by the Detroit City Council new districts, reflecting the 2020 census, which is still contested by city officials, but they're like, okay, well, our charter says we got to use the census numbers. We're going to do it. The east side saw a precipitous drop in population, requiring some shifts. We've got the map up in front of us, and we're going to, of course, link to that on Daily Detroit in our show notes and in our newsletter. The shifts at first might seem minor, but they also really do change some things up for legislators.
Yeah, there are some things that are really interesting here, and I'll start where you started, which is the loss of population on the east side. Districts 3 and 4 in particular, both of those districts are going to have to be expanded because they geographically expanded because they've lost so much population. District 4 in particular saw a loss of almost 10,000. And that's really significant considering that the larger these districts get, the more that the same issue of being able to manage these districts comes up. You know, you talk about being able to service the same amount of people with less and less civil resources, police, fire, all that kind of stuff. But for the sake of governance, it just makes it a little bit harder for each of these city council people to be able to get into their districts and really listen to the people there because now they have such large geographical footprints to manage.
Well, and the concerns, I know that it was something that they really tried to value the concerns of local communities and try to keep them contiguous. But from my experience, it feels like Detroit is a series of hubs with, space in between them. And I almost wonder in the future, and this is a conversation for another day, if in fact more representatives might be useful in order to keep those districts more representative. I know that would require a charter change and all of that stuff. But if you think about how big of a district some of these have and how much land they're going and how many population hubs, then you see things like, nobody in the public discourse cries for downtown. But I know in my inbox, a lot of people are like, hey, downtown being split up isn't really fair.
It's not fair, nor does it seem, efficient, either. It's split pretty much right along Campus Marshes, not along Woodward proper, but it's split where Campus Marshes is on one side and you have the west part of downtown or the south by southwest part of downtown.
And then there's like a jog that's just like 2 blocks before Warren that jogs west. And
yeah, it's
really
weird stuff. But I think to that point, I think that that's not the worst idea, but I also don't know if that improves anything drastically, right? Because I look at a district like District 5, which covers the east side of downtown, all the way up to, North End and past Hamtramck, and it's a massive district that I think the folks who live in the northern part of District 5 have very little in common or even really care that much about what's happening in the downtown areas or the Lafayette Park side or the Indian Village part of that district. It just feels like so many of them are so demographically divergent that it becomes kind of tough to govern.
My prediction will be that in some years we will see a Woodward district up to Highland Park Hamtramck or something like that. Because, you know, the reality is that this city has shifted a lot, and where the population is now officially is where the population was in 1910 when the city went from like Clark Park or like Fort Wayne to the north end to a little bit east of Belle Isle, right? Like it was a very different city and a very different density, and it becomes difficult to represent in these ways. And I really wonder, you know, you had this prediction that the city's going to be able to officially stop this like population drain, but it just shows me that we need to focus on hubs as much as we can. And there's going to be spaces. I was just driving out on the Davison the other day, and like, man, like there are people out there for sure, but then there are also blocks of like literally just blocks of, or the east side. You think about the area that's inside Jefferson. You can go blocks. There's like one house on the block, two houses.
Yeah. And the thing to me is that, you know, we can talk all about, you know, urban renewal and reclaiming the land and using that for other purposes. But the truth of the matter is that nobody's doing anything with it right now. And that contributes, because who is then going to go in and develop land that nobody lives on or around? It's very difficult to justify.
Unless you're a large manufacturing presence or something like that, and that comes with its own issues.
Exactly. You know, again, because of just the history of how Detroit is zoned, it's very difficult to put in, you know, mixed use zoning or anything like that. Because, I mean, after, 1920 something, like the whole thing is zoned to be a giant suburb with
which is
Mile
a weird
Road.
thing. Yeah, like a weird thing. But in the city of Detroit, it's suburbanly zoned outside of that core area that we talked about in 1910. Another issue is, frankly, I'm going to say it, racism, because a lot of the early zoning of Detroit prohibited multifamily buildings.
Yes.
Because it would encourage, quote unquote, undesirables. So we had neighborhood after neighborhood. And I know because I hand demolished some of these 700 square foot matchstick homes. A lot of it was the tinder for, you know, Devil's Night and things like that, that just were not able to be modernized. It's something that should have been an apartment.
Yeah.
And in those days, with all of that population, people were sleeping in shifts. People don't realize like how packed in things were and how poorly designed much of Detroit was from the start. Like, I get when older Detroiters tell me, yeah, there were some glory days, but also we shouldn't look too nostalgically back.
No, we shouldn't. And, you know, I think about, you know, where I grew up in Brightmouth, where that neighborhood originally did not let black people live in it. It was for white workers at the Rouge plant. That's who it was for. And even though those homes, I'm going to be honest, aren't necessarily the most well kept up in the city, District 1 is the most populous district in the city. And it's really, really insane to think that you have neighborhoods like Rosedale and Brightmouth and, you know, Old Redford and all those places located up in District 1 that kind of have what you're talking about, that kind of have these sustained commercial hubs or commercial corridors that could support 100,000.
Grandmont Rosedale is a part of Detroit, but it is an entity. And I know because I go up there and I'll shop up there. I'll go to the Rosa, the coffee shop or whatever.
Yeah.
When
Vegan
you're out that
Soul's
way,
up there.
Vegan Soul, or my experience living in University District, it's its own contained area.
Yeah.
When I lived in University District, I came downtown a whole lot less.
Yeah.
I was either in Ferndale or on the Avenue of Fashion because you are miles out there.
And this is the design of suburbs. If you were to pluck District 2, which is University District, Bagley, all that kind of stuff, Avenue of Fashion, if you were to pick that whole district up and put it somewhere in Western Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, whatever, it would just be a suburb. It is already built that way. It is already built to be a suburb.
I was just in Columbus over the weekend, and I know some people are going to turn off right with that word, but I was in a neighborhood where the population density was close to 10,000 people per square mile, with 2 Krogers within walking distance. And it's an older neighborhood, but it was designed as a city. And you feel that design difference right away.
Yeah. When we look at these new districts and the expansion of them geographically, it's not an answer, it's a reaction to what's already happening, and it doesn't necessarily make anything better. It doesn't necessarily help solve for any of the issues. It just helps make the numbers a little bit more even for the purposes of voting. But
Which I
ultimately-
understand.
Which I understand, and it is necessary. It is a function of government that we have to do this. But ultimately, the issues that Detroit have, and the reason why a lot of these districts and neighborhoods have not been able to foster growth, is because of the fundamental way that the city is designed. It is not designed to sustain dense, not even heavy density, but just medium density growth. It is not made for that.
Some listeners have written in about the frustration with like zoning changes and things like that. But there is a tension out there in the discourse, Norris, of, well, shouldn't every part of the city have a future? Shouldn't every part of the city see some sort of development?
I tout that on this show very much so. And I think because of the way the city is zoned, that there is opportunity to do that. And I think, the more we have people coming into downtown, coming into the city and seeing how this area was able to, quote unquote, rejuvenate itself, mostly on the back of a billionaire, but I digress, is the fact that if we were able to look at Avenue of Fashion and look at some of the areas just right up that Woodward corridor and to say, this actually can be floor level retail with 4 floors of apartments on top of it. Or there could be a high-rise apartment building right here. Or there could be, more retail right here. All of it needs to be rethought and all of it needs to be rezoned, because if you do that, then people wouldn't feel that pressure to have to live downtown for the sort of quote-unquote city experience.
Look, I am not mad at Savage Fenty opening downtown.
Mm-hmm.
However, let me put an idea out there. What if they could have reinforced the Avenue of Fashion as a corridor of Black excellence and open up on the Avenue of Fashion? What kind of message would that have sent?
I think it would have sent a very strong message, but again, location.
But you gotta have the space to do it, and I don't know if they have the space.
But you gotta have location, baby. You got to be able to justify being able to spend that much money redeveloping a space for a product that, let's be honest, is not a life essential. And I think Avenue of Fashion is not there yet. I think it could be in the future, but I think it's not there yet. But when I think about what the potential of that neighborhood and many other neighborhoods in Detroit could be, I think of that. I think of the corner of Milwaukee and Damon and Wicker Park in Chicago. And if you've ever been there, you kind of get where I'm going, where you have sort of like Grand River, a northwest diagonal thoroughfare, and then you have a north-south thoroughfare. And on that corner, in a mile in every direction, is street-level retail with apartments on the top. There is not one building in that neighborhood over 6 floors. And so if you develop, these sort of mile road commercial corridors in that way, you give opportunity for some of those neighborhoods to be able to come back because people are able to have amenities. And if we do that, if we're able to take sort of what we're seeing up and down Woodward from here to the river, if we're able to do that on 6 Mile, on 7 Mile, on Grand River, on Gratiot, whatever, then I think we'll be able to begin to see some true growth. But that's going to require some developers to take a chance.
I had a moment of missing amenities because the other night, me and engineer Randy were having a drink with actor Miles Teller. And then afterward, we went to dinner, did some things, and we walked by an actual City Target, plopped right there. And I'm like, that should be here. Like, we need stuff like that. I'd love to hear people's feedback. We'll kind of pause the conversation there. We could always keep going, Norris. 313-789-3211 or dailydetroit@gmail.com. I would love to hear what some of your thoughts are. Norris Howard.
Yes.
You got a library card. And for listeners who don't know, we have a whole series, and we're going to do more talking about libraries. You got a library card in the suburbs.
Yeah, I did. I feel like, a number of our listeners, I don't want to say they shamed me, but they definitely made me feel bad about not utilizing the public library system.
Also, thank you, Claire. Claire specifically.
Yeah.
Shamed.
Yeah.
Named and shamed.
And you know what? I think that was okay. So my wife and I went out and we got our library cards. And, one thing that I really enjoyed is it was explained to me just how many extras you get from going to the library. I think it was dope. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't know. But I think the main thing looking at this and understanding the value of our public library system is we gotta destigmatize it, because it's not just books, man. It's everything. I had a free subscription to the New York Times because of it. I'm in, man. I'm in. You know, I go there and I work now maybe a couple times a week. It's really cool. So I advise everybody to utilize their public library.
There's even video games where you're at.
There are video games. If for somebody like me who still works a little bit in the video game industry, that is a lifesaver, because I'm not spending $60 on games I don't get review codes for.
But it also makes me think a little bit about some research I was doing about western suburbs.
Yeah.
Specifically, I did not realize this, and it's definitely my fault. But I didn't realize that Canton now has more people in it than Livonia.
Yes.
It's crazy how we're sprawling west.
It is one of the quickest growing suburbs in Metro Detroit. And what's interesting about it is its demographics. It's about 20% Asian, about 10% African American, I think about 5% Latino. So it's quite a diverse area compared to your Westlands and Livonias and other places. And I think what's interesting about it,
Also wealthy.
and wealthy, I forget the exact average income, but it's definitely in the six figures. I think it's like 615 or something like that.
It is in the top 100 of communities over 50,000 people in America.
Yeah, I think that's telling, considering, you know, just how quickly it's growing in the demographics there. But I think also what's interesting is that it's caused me to sort of rethink not just what I think the western suburbs are, but what I think all of our suburbs are. I think for people who grew up here, there's sort of this conceptualization of when we say certain areas, what we think it is. Like we say Troy, and even in the national context, when we were talking about 22 midterm elections and the 2020 elections, there's this context of, you know, Oakland County and Troy and Ferndale, the Republicans have lost educated white women. And I looked at the numbers. Troy is 25% Asian. That is a massive shift in demographics from when I was young. It wasn't that many.
It goes to show you how diverse Metro Detroit really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, 40% of our listeners are not white.
Yes. And that's the thing that I think, you know, when it comes to outside the city limits, that we really don't think about very often. Obviously, there was the Wall Street Journal piece about Dearborn that was absolutely just stupid and shouldn't have been, you know, cleared for print in the first place.
I responded to that in the newsletter. And also, Friday host Devin O'Reilly had a piece in the Detroit News, which we are going to be talking about later this week.
Yeah, and, you know, absolutely, I think it was just a gross piece. But everybody nationally, I think, knows about Dearborn. I think most people nationally, obviously, they know about Detroit. Even to a certain extent, they're now knowing about Hamtramck because of all the controversy that was going on there as well over the past year or so. But now we're starting to see growing East Asian, South Asian communities. We're starting to see the Arab Muslim community from Dearborn start to expand out to other municipalities. And we're starting to see a growing middle class and wealthy but left-leaning community in Wayne and in Oakland County as well. And I think that's really interesting because for me, in my mind, when I think of rich lefties, I think of Washtenaw County. I think of Ann Arbor. I don't necessarily think of Canton when that comes to mind.
But if you are living in some place like Canton Charter Township, you're basically right between Ann Arbor and Detroit at that point.
Yeah, and I think ideologically you would assume that it would be a little bit more conservative, but it's really not. It's actually a bastion of the moderates. And I think that's what we're starting to see across the suburbs.
But isn't that like the power? I know it's very controversial right now, but isn't that kind of the power of people like Joe Biden and Gretchen Whitmer?
It is. And I think also of like Alyssa Slotkin as well, of people who are just sort of the quote unquote like common sense Democrats, if you will.
I keep thinking that Hill Harper is going to get a message once he hits the suburbs. And no offense to Hill Harper, but like there's a different world once you, and there's a lot of voters out there who's running for Senate in the primary against Slotkin. Just so you know.
And I openly invite Hill Harper to come on to the
and
show.
And
Alyssa to come on to the show and kind of talk about this because I think it's interesting. But when we look at the numbers and you look at the voting results of who wins where, the moderate Democrats are who really run the suburbs, whether we're talking about Western Wayne County in, Southern Oakland County, even slightly Southern Macomb County as well. It's just really, really interesting to see everybody talks about where are the moderates. Kind of crazy. They're in Southeast Michigan.
But, the thing is that the moderates aren't posting on social media that much.
Doesn't matter. They vote.
Do you know what I mean?
It doesn't matter.
That's what I'm saying,
vote.
though. But it distorts the conversation a lot. With this recent Republican primary, you see all this stuff. Oh, there's opposition to Trump, blah, 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 Nikki Haley. And it's like, she got beat in the public primary. Now, I know that they have two. There's a caucus and a vote. She got beat by none of the candidates in Nevada.
Yeah.
In the public election. There's also a caucus, which Trump is, because you can only participate in the public or the caucus.
Yeah.
Trump's in the caucus. Haley decided, I'm going to go with the public vote. She got beat by none of above. Yeah, literally, that is an option.
None of the above. It won the public election in Nevada. It is telling because if you live in the Twitter sphere or the online communities, you would think that that's a viable opposition. And in real life, it's not. And, the more I look at even upcoming who could be potentially next up for the Democratic nomination for president, and we look at, everybody's touting Gavin Newsom, but I just think California is so far flung in such an entity onto itself.
I think it's Gretchen's if she wants it.
If she wants it, I think it's Gretchen's. And I think she is intelligent enough, she is effective enough, because all she has to do is run our track record. And basically said, listen, I all but destroyed the Michigan GOP. And I've held on to and expanded all of these liberal policies and liberal protections.
Some would say are fundamental rights.
Yeah, and some would say fundamental rights. I think for what the GOP puts up after this next presidential election, a Newsom-Whitmer ticket is nigh unbeatable.
Interesting. But Whitmer at the top.
I think you put Whitmer at the top. That's just me as a Michigander and as somebody who thinks common sense wins more than going whole hog. I don't think Gavin Newsom's ego would allow him to do that. But I think a Whitmer-Newsom ticket in whatever permutation is going to be really difficult to beat. Really difficult to beat.
Circling this conversation back to Canton, what's something that you thought you knew that you learned in the last few years?
Living out that way, I had an assumption that it was just like this sleepy suburb. You know what I mean? That it was more like Berkeley, I guess.
Well, I don't think Berkeley's super sleepy. But
yeah, sleepy to me.
We're going to get another legislator calling us, aren't we, Norris?
I don't care. Sleepy suburb is not a pejorative, okay? It's a very lovely, safe place where people feel
it's a cute little downtown.
Cute little downtown that you could walk around and go to a couple restaurants. It's nice, okay? Compared to where I grew up, it's a sleepy damn suburb, okay? But Canton is busy in ways that I didn't think I expected and that I almost don't like.
Really?
Yeah, it's just there's only two real streets to shop on, and that bothers me. But I think in the positives, I will say, is that I do find the people to be incredibly open and incredibly nice, and I didn't expect that. I expected it to be much more cloistered than it is. I thought
I know that was a concern for you moving from an area where basically you're the majority to an area where you're not.
I am not. It's not hanging that way. People are very nice out there, and they are very receptive to just hanging out. One of my neighbors, literally, I was barbecuing, and one of my neighbors just walked over and just introduced herself, and I was like, this is weird. Like, you know what I mean? Compared to, the past 20 or some odd years. I grew up with the same neighbors around me for all my childhood, so they didn't need to introduce myself. They knew me when I was born, literally.
So we're going to hear about some more restaurants and things in the future?
Yeah. As you know, my love for Raising Cane's. That's coming to Canton, and then we have a couple new hibachi spots going in Ford Road and a few other things, a few other restaurants coming in. Obviously, we talked to the owner of Kawa House last week, and I've gone to that location as well.
There's more than IKEA and meatballs.
There's more than IKEA and Target, because that's what everybody thinks is just a giant IKEA and Target.
Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts. 313-789-3211 or dailydetroit@gmail.com. Norris Howard, always wonderful to speak with you.
It is always fantastic to be here to talk to you all.
Absolutely. With that, I am Jer Stays. Remember to drop 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, and that our sponsors are important to us. Please support them. And if you want to support us directly, membership is crucial to make local media work. Patreon.com/dailydetroit. One thing I will mention before we go, got word that Google Podcasts is shutting down. And Norris, we're going to have multiple recommendations here, people. But I went and looked, and we have hundreds of listeners, more than 300 people over at Google Podcasts. And I don't want to leave you all behind. Now, I know that Google has a plan for transitioning some stuff to YouTube Music and such, but Norris, you're playing with your Android phone right now.
Yeah. I heard you.
How do you get podcasts?
I'm Spotify all day, man.
Really? So Spotify's your thing?
That's my jam. I'm on Spotify all day, every day.
Now, I got to ask you this, because I get this online a lot, and this is part of my online world versus real world. People sometimes get mad at Spotify. It doesn't bug you.
No, it does what it's supposed to do. Just pay for it.
Like none of the other stuff, or even like the Joe Rogan or the whatever?
I can't control who they put on the platform. I don't care. Does
All right.
it have the albums I want? Yes. Does it have the audiobooks I want? Yes. Is the process for getting to the podcasts easy? Yes. What else do you want, people? Okay? You can't control what goes on the platform. You don't own it. Grow up.
All right, I'm leaving Norris Howard with the last word. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.